want to welcome you back to the webinar if you have joined us in the past. And if you've never joined us, then I would like to welcome you to your first webinar. Historically, pre-COVID, to be honest, we were offering these almost monthly, and it was just a topic that was relevant to our clients or to something we were seeing as a trend that we wanted to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to hear a little bit more about. Every one of our webinars has always been free. We offer free information, education, give you an opportunity to ask your questions, hop in with us when it's relevant to your work and your practice and your workplace. And if it's not, then obviously you can bypass that month. We took a big hiatus because life was complicated for everybody, and now we are trying to get back at it. So you will start to see our webinars popping up more frequently. We do have one scheduled for November. Alex will be hosting that one at the end of November. It's also on sustainability and building good work practices and documentation in that make your job a little bit easier and still allow you to tackle ergonomics well. And that one will be, the information for that session will be posted on our website shortly once we get this one cleared off and the recording and things uploaded. So I should say that the secondary part to that is that one of the questions we always get is, can we get access to the slides or to the slide deck? We don't share our slides, but we do post a recording of every webinar. So this webinar is being recorded right now, and it will be posted to our webpage, and an email will go out to you, to every registrant, that will let you know that the link is live. You're welcome to go back and watch it yourself again if you want to revisit any of the sections. Obviously, you can share it with a colleague if you felt like there was something that they needed to check in with or listen to. And that will all be available to you by tomorrow. I may not be, I have to go out this afternoon to see a client, so it'll probably be up tomorrow, I would think, by the time I get around to getting it posted. But that will all be live and ready to go tomorrow. So some quick housekeeping things. I do have the chat open as I talk to you today. And so if for any reason you have a question at any point, I would encourage you to throw it in the chat. That would be super helpful. If it makes sense, I will answer it on the fly. And if it's something I'm going to cover in a slide or two, I might tell you that I've seen it and I'll put a pin in it for another slide because I want to cover it when we get to that section. So to not sort of mess us up today. So without any further ado, let's jump in and start chatting about sustainability in your office ergonomics program. My name is Jen McGillis. I am one of the co-owners of Pro Ergonomics, and I do a lot of office ergonomics for our business, actually. That's one of my main areas or roles. And so I spend a lot of time in this space and talking to clients about office ergonomics, how to make their programs better, how to make them work for them better, trying to help tackle some of the gaps or issues that we see, and sort of proposing different strategies. We have lots of clients working on this in very different ways. And so my goal today, or my hope today, is to actually share some of that information, some of the challenges that we've experienced over the last few years, what our clients are experiencing, some of the challenges that they've gone through, whether it was by their own hand or by someone else's hand, and trying to give you sort of a lay of the land of what your options might be on how to make this program work well for you. So you're not just always putting out fires, because that's what we spend a lot of time doing. We have an injury, we're reacting to that. But we want to get our program to a more sustainable, easier, more systematic process. And that takes a little bit of work up front to try and build some of these pieces in. And so hopefully I'll give you some food for thought today based on what our clients are actually doing, because I want you to hear about that and what we've seen and experienced over the last few years. So my sort of a very brief outline is I want to talk about elements of a successful program. They may not all apply to you. Some of them might be a perfect fit for where your organization is at right now, or what your process looks like. Some of them may not be, and that's fine. You can sort of pick and choose what makes sense to you. But I want to talk about a few different pieces. Maybe what you weren't expecting, you probably expected me to talk about some training and assessments and sort of doing the sort of typical office ergonomic pieces. Maybe you weren't expecting me to dive into some of the earlier stages, the design and the procurement process. But I do want to touch on those today because I think there are some really valuable takeaways on how we can get a more sustainable program that is working better for us if we can start to capture ergonomics earlier in the process, right? Not just at the employees are at their workstation stage, but what are we putting at their workstation? What is the pre-stages that we can sort of consider ergonomics as part of? So I do want to ask one quick question because that might help guide some of my examples today. What is one goal you have for your office ergonomic program? That might help me guide some examples. You can throw that in the chat. If you've got more than one goal, you're welcome to throw in more than one. I would love to hear from you. What is a goal you have for your office ergonomic program? Oh, good question, Corby. That's a good statement, actually. Okay, love it. So Corby has typed in that he is looking for tools on how to assess how the program's doing, right? How are we doing? Are we being effective with the pieces that we're tackling? Any others you want to share? Goals for your office ergonomic programs? Proactive versus reactive. Yes, I love that. Yeah, if somebody's already in discomfort, going to the doctor, now we're more like an accommodation disability management kind of side of things rather than hopefully preventing that injury in the first place. How often should we reassess it and buy in from all divisions? Okay, those are great starts, and we're going to touch on most of that. Oh, and Yvonne's thrown in there staff education. Yes, same equipment across the board. Yes, everybody using the same thing. This is a tricky one because everybody gets things at different ages and stages and stuff gets passed along, but that can certainly be a challenge as well. Okay, I love it. So let's dive into some of those questions. Oh, I got some animation there. So obviously, I think general rule of thumb or general sort of comments, I think everybody's trying to prevent injury, right? And that comes from some of those examples you've thrown in there. Are we providing the right equipment? Is that equipment consistent or sustained across our organization? How do we even know what the right equipment is? Providing that education. Someone mentioned training for sure, right? Trying to train or educate staff on how do we use the stuff we do have because some of it's excellent and not being used well. So how do we make sure that it's being set up correctly? And how are we evaluating that or evaluating fit, which connects a little bit back to Corby's question about assessment or reassessment of the program. Then the secondary part, I think most of us are probably in already or maybe trying to get out of is that reaction to injury, right? An accommodation. Now we have someone who has an injury and we're trying to manage that. We're trying to figure out what that's going to look like. Many of us, I think, indirectly are looking to increase employee morale. We want our staff to feel supported. We want them to feel like the organization cares about them, wants them to be comfortable at their workstation. Those are good sort of healthy work practice things. So ensuring that worker comfort. The indirectly, which no one mentioned, but it actually will increase productivity as a general rule. Anytime we can make a task easier on folks, we tend to increase productivity because they're focused on the right thing, right? They are comfortable while they're at work, so they're able to engage and focus on the work that they're doing rather than on the fact that their back hurts and they need to adjust their chair every 15 minutes, or they're constantly up and down trying to move around, taking more breaks because they can't sit at their workstation for longer periods of time. And for me, the sort of all of those things can all be true at the same time. But for me, the piece that I think is the most important is the more systematic we are about the approach, the easier it becomes, right? If it's built or ingrained into the systems that we're using, it is more likely to be easy on you, right? As the people who are executing the program, it's more likely to be easy on you because the system is just going to work, right? It's going to be smooth. But it's also going to be easier on your employees, right? They are going to know how to set up their equipment. They're going to know how to communicate, who to talk to, what to ask for, what is the process when I need an ergonomic assessment, when something has happened and I'm not feeling great, what is the process? How does that begin? And that is an important piece of the process too, because a lot of staff I meet with didn't know an ergonomic assessment was available to them, right? And that's not necessarily a win, right? We want people to be able to access the services that we have in place. Yes, okay. We've had a couple additions to my question earlier, and that was about training tools when there isn't a lot of resources to go around. Yes, large company, one ergonomist. I feel you. There's a lot of large companies, zero ergonomists out there. So that is a common problem. And standardized equipment, and we're definitely going to talk about that as well. Okay. I'm going to I've thrown this up there because I just wanted to highlight it. This has been like a wrench in the system for a lot of folks, right? Is that I don't know where all of you are coming from today, but a lot of you will have folks who work from home at least part time. Right? You may not have everyone working at home ever. You may have staff that are fully in the office. You might have staff that are fully at home, but a lot of you are working in this in-between space where you have staff who are in the office, 2 or 3 days a week, at home 2 or 3 days a week. And that has added some complexity to the system because now we're trying to support people who are working from multiple locations. And what does that look like? Oftentimes our ergonomic setup at home looks very different than our ergonomic setup in the office. So how do we get both pieces working together? Because if you've got a terrible setup at home and you're creating injury or discomfort, but you're getting an ergonomic assessment in the office, there's a disconnect there, right? Because my problem is really like the root cause of the issue is the home office, but someone is evaluating and assessing my work office, and that's not really where my problem is. And so even if my work office is beautifully set up, it's not likely to actually address the issue because my root cause or my root problem is actually at home. And so, or vice versa. Sometimes we actually see the reverse. Home is beautiful and office isn't, but oftentimes it's the other way around. We usually see more varied workstations, equipment, et cetera. Going back to that standardized equipment, that is one of the number one challenges, I think, for home offices is that there is almost no standardization. People have from someone who has done hundreds of home office assessments, I can tell you that I've seen the full gamut of what people are working at, right? From like kitchen chairs, non-adjustable, laptops only, to some other kind of MacGyvered setup with crazy, makeshift desks in corners on top of shelving units. Like I've seen all manner of ergonomics at home. Some were amazing, some were terrible, and everything else you can imagine in between. So it has been a bit of a challenge for workplaces that have that hybrid piece involved. So I think today we're going to talk about, or my intention today is to talk about these sort of key pieces. I've got a couple different things to talk about for some of them, but essentially we're going to spend a little bit of time on that sort of getting ahead of the curve kind of process. What are we doing from a design of a workstation, from a procurement or purchasing that standardized equipment list? What are we doing on that side of things to make the system easier? Because in theory, if we have the right equipment and it is adjustable and most people will fit that equipment, then all the other pieces become easier. The education will work better. The assessment will be simpler and easier because you don't need a bunch of other stuff. You've already really got it in place. You just have to make sure people are using it correctly. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that side because I think the importance of being more proactive by sort of dealing with it before it even begins it can't be understated, the importance of that. But then we have the reality is that we can't always control or impact that. That sometimes is very difficult depending on what your role is. And then just as importantly, we still need to support the staff, right? That we still need to make sure they have the education. They maybe need a setup assessment. They maybe need a follow-up or a check-in. We need to sort of reevaluate that side of the coin too. So we're going to talk about all the pieces today. So starting in that first stage, I'm going to call it the get ahead stage, right? We're getting ahead of the injuries. We're getting ahead of the curve, the problems that we know potentially are coming. Office ergonomic challenges are often driven by poor workstation setup, but sometimes, in many cases, that's driven by poor workstation equipment, right? That it is not possible to fit it to me. So even though you gave me the Cadillac of education, right? You gave me the most perfect education system. I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. If I don't have equipment that allows me to get there, then I'm going to struggle, right? It's not going to be possible for me to achieve that beautiful setup that you've shown me in education. Okay. So I want to talk about those getting ahead pieces. So this is the design phase, right? So this is where what we see here is where sometimes, okay, so there's several factors here. Number one is like just initial design of a workstation or an office. We've seen several clients over the last few years redesign things. So I have one client who's opened a brand new office and they really considered ergonomics in their design. They go, all their staff there have some really great adjustability. And I'll tell you the simplicity of those assessments is incredibly high. They are easy, right? Because I can adjust that equipment quickly, easily. People are feeling better the moment that I leave. They have good stuff in place because they've been really intentional right? Learning from all the other issues over the years with all this, somebody asked about standardizing equipment across different places in the org, right? So over years, they, have a mishmash of chairs and desks and monitors and et cetera. And they've learned from all the issues that we've seen as I've done hundreds of assessments for them. They've been learning and they've been using that information. And so when they built this new workstation, they really factored ergonomics. They fought hard to factor ergonomics into the design. Okay, so trying to get it in from the beginning so that everything after that, at that specific office, not all their offices, just that office, that one office is much, much easier from an ergonomic perspective. The other part of this comes along with a lot of redesign we've seen over the last few years has been part of this home and office component, right? Is that we've seen a lot of workplaces building a shared workstation. So instead of having dedicated offices at your office location, right? You don't have dedicated cubicles for everyone. People come in and they hotel, right? They pick a workstation that is available. They sign it out maybe ahead of time, or they choose to use it when they get there. They find an available space and they drop in, and they, are obviously going to just use whatever equipment is there. But if you're spending a lot of time at those workstations and not just 15 minutes here and there, we still need to be capturing ergonomics. So if we have staff coming in 2 or 3 days a week, what are we ensuring that they have in their office? And there has to be a bit of an evaluation here of what do they need and how are we going to get it, right? So it's a bit of a initial evaluation process, because we do see a variety of what people need. Some people need 2 monitors, some people don't. Everybody is bringing in a laptop. Maybe not, right? And so do some people need different things because they're going to be working on a laptop? They need their monitor to have a laptop mount. They need to have a laptop riser present. They need to have an external keyboard and mouse, whereas other people are working in a more cloud-based environment, right? So they come in, they log into a desktop computer that is available there, and they're not necessarily carrying a laptop back and forth. So the IT component here can be a relevant piece too. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of some things we've seen over the last couple of years in addition to just new design, right? So new design, we have totally revamping the way work is happening. We have people working at home and at work potentially. We're redesigning a new office. We want to capture ergonomics in there. I've given you those 2 examples. But we've also seen some, I don't want to call it an epic fail, but we did have an epic fail. I had a client who overnight, about a year ago, somewhat along the way in IT, decided that workers no longer required 2 monitors, right? Overnight, this decision, I don't know how long it took IT or whoever was involved in that initial decision to make it, but it got rolled out effectively like over a weekend. So on Friday, there were 2 monitors at everybody's workstations. They were bringing in their laptop and then connecting these 2 monitors, but their laptop was basically just a hard to the side, and they were docking it and connecting all this equipment to it. Monday morning rolls in, and there's been a change, right? There's been a policy change. Someone along the way was like, you know what, how we can save a bunch of money? We don't need 2 screens. Everybody has a laptop. That's a suitable second screen. So we're going to do away with 2 monitors. As of tomorrow, everybody is going to have a single external monitor and a laptop. And that's what their ergonomics is going to look like. So a policy change that didn't include health and safety, didn't include a whole bunch of other groups, right, was more about a cost savings perspective. And I get that, right? But without a lot of consultation, all these second monitors disappeared. So all of a sudden, my number of requests drastically increased, literally overnight, right? My requests for ergonomic assessments, the number of complaints they were having from staff increased overnight, because all of a sudden, staff who were used to working with 2 screens that were both full-size monitors, up nice and high, everything was good, created an ergonomic nightmare, right? Now we have everybody working on 1 screen, which is fine if you only need 1 screen, but if you needed a second screen, now we had a laptop as our second screen, which was smaller, much smaller in some cases than the original monitors. And just as importantly, there was no plan in place on how they were going to tackle the ergonomics of setting up that laptop. And so everyone's laptop went on the desktop to the left or the right of their existing monitor. And they had one up here, their big monitor up nice and here, but their secondary screen, which was now their laptop, was down low, off to the left or the right. So all of a sudden everyone was complaining of neck, upper back, shoulder. And so a policy change sometimes impacted the design and the equipment that was required in order to achieve good ergonomic setup. Right. So that was an example of sort of, it became a bit of a, I did several assessments and and the theme was always the same, right? Everybody was struggling with only one monitor and this laptop. And I finally went back to the client and I said, okay, this is what happened. And they said, oh yeah, we know. I said, well, this is the ergonomic implications of what happened, right? So this is what it's looking like for your staff. And I could do assessments, as many as you want me to do, but I'll tell you, my recommendation is all going to be the same, right? Is every one of these people who needs to use two screens as part of their job needs some way to get their laptop up. So you need to start thinking about what that's going to look like. Here are some thoughts, some suggestions, and sort of presented it back to them to begin the sort of problem-solving approach. But ideally, it would have been a much smoother process without a whole bunch of ergonomic challenges after the fact if we had been able to plan ahead and be part of that conversation. I talked about at work, at home already, right? That's a key part of design change, and that shared workstation element are kind of key. I think really this comes down to one of the questions or comments earlier is buy-in from all divisions, right? This idea that multidisciplinary team, right? There's a lot of people that need to be involved in these discussions, and you are one of them, right? And sometimes it doesn't feel like it's very easy to get in on that conversation, but trying to strategically plan so that you can be part of the conversations, you can start sort of poking at what happens if we make this policy change? What happens if, we're designing this new piece of equipment or this new workstation or this new office? You want to be part of that conversation. So figuring out how to build health and safety or disability management into that conversation is going to be an important way to help ward off or make your life easier in the long run. Because I guarantee you, my contact at our client, their life was incredibly difficult for the first month or so after that IT change, right? So this policy change happens and there's this massive influx of ergonomic assessments. So instead of focusing on the other 80 to 90% of their job, they probably spent 40% of their time putting out ergonomic fires, scheduling assessments, doing follow-up, having reactive conversations about what did we create ergonomically in terms of challenges by making this change. And so that design phase and getting involved earlier in the process would A, have prevented injuries and discomfort, B, would have made my contact's job significantly easier because we would have still taken the monitors away, right? That might still have been the solution because I understand there's a cost savings there and you do have two screens, right? Your laptop's fine, but they would have also been ahead of the curve. So while they're taking monitors away, they're delivering laptop risers, right? So we're like making that transition as seamless and smooth as possible. And that conversation about, okay, we can take that monitor away, but what is that going to look like from a health and safety perspective? What are we concerned about from an injury perspective if we make this change? Sometimes the answer is none. You change one standard keyboard for another, and it's not really going to impact many people, if any, unless they need something specialty. But something like those monitor changes can make a massive impact. Right? The same thing goes when we're talking about design changes from building those hoteling workstations, right? If we can get involved in the conversation, hopefully what we're doing is ordering equipment or getting equipment or at least presenting the problems that we've experienced over the last few years or concerns we have with the proposed equipment, and we can start to sort of poke holes in that. What are we going to create, right? What injuries or injury risk are we creating by not having something that's adjustable, by choosing a monitor that doesn't have a height adjustable pedestal, for example, right? By choosing a fixed height desk, what are our limitations? What happens if we have to add keyboard trays to half of this? What are the costs associated with that? And so you can keep sort of poking and promoting ergonomics and get those folks who are making those design decisions hopefully more on board with considering ergonomics earlier in the process, which would be the deal. Sometimes this also includes department stakeholders. I didn't sort of state them first, but not all departments need the same equipment, right? And so that is one of the challenges we experience. That's like, so when your question was about standardizing office ergonomic equipment and furniture, totally fair. Standardizing that is important, and I'll talk about standardization, but there is also some element of, do we need this? Does every department need this? There'll be some staff that need different equipment based on the type of work that they perform, right? So some staff will need a larger monitor. Somebody will need 2 screens. Someone will need 1. Someone will still works on a lot of paperwork. Maybe they need a document holder of some kind. Some people spend all day at the computer, right? They are really sort of chained to their desk. The nature of their work, places them here all day. They would be better candidates for a sit stand than someone who is out in meetings, maybe, in the community, maybe out in the workplace somewhere, and is only at their desk for maybe 40% of the day, right? They don't need the sit stand as much because they are get more mobility through naturally through the sort of flow of their day. And so department stakeholders also are important here because they may help guide what someone needs or doesn't need and help you make good decisions about what equipment needs to be present. So I've talked about IT. They can be super valuable. That can also be a challenge, right? We want to make sure they don't always think about the person on the other end, right? They often are thinking about, like, our engineering team. We see that a lot with them too. They're thinking about the functionality of the program, of the system, of the equipment, and looking at it from a different perspective. And that's valuable, but isn't necessarily capturing that ergonomic or injury risk perspective as well. And that's where that multidisciplinary team comes into play. I also think purchasing or procurement, whatever you call that department at your workplace, is an important piece in the design phase as well, right? We need to procure the right equipment, which I think goes to Belinda's comment about standardizing the ergonomic equipment and furniture so that we get the right tools and equipment in place in the first place, right? We're making good choices about what equipment is arriving on site. So A, it fits most people that are present. B, it's adjustable so that if I'm not at my workstation 100% of the time, or maybe I leave this job and I go to a different position at the, company, I've got a new workstation, I can adjust the new one to fit me, and the new employee that's now sitting at my workstation can also adjust the equipment to fit them, right? It creates that continuity that allows everyone to achieve good ergonomic setup because there is adjustability and standardization among all of the equipment. Oftentimes, this can also get you better pricing, right? Procurement serves a great role at most organizations, right? They have the ability and this unique position to gather and get equipment at the best prices possible, and that's incredibly valuable. However, it can't come at the cost of ergonomics, right? Choosing a chair, for example, that has the right amount or right type of adjustability. What is sort of the base adjustability that we're looking for? Maybe a chair if you want sort of standardization across the organization. For most people, a standard chair with basic, with standard ergonomic adjustment features will fit 80% of your population or more, right? It's going to be pretty good for most of your staff. But you will have some folks who are small, right, who are I'm in that category, a 5'2" or shorter. They may not fit very well on the chair that you've selected as standard, right? So looking at, ways to purchase some chairs come in small, medium, and large sizes, or standard, petite, and tall sizes. There's all different types and sizes of chairs, with the idea that it's not a one-size-fits-all system. And so having that in your back pocket, that the make and model you have or that you're bringing into your workplace has a good adjustability to fit a wide range of people, but then we know still that there's going to be a few outliers that we're going to need to accommodate into a different chair, and having a system in place to identify those ones to hopefully get them into a chair that actually fits them and provides them with the support that they're looking for. The other thing that goes along with procurement, which speaks to my example of that client who has just built a new office and implemented all kinds of adjustability, they really did learn a lot from the different workstation assessments we'd done over the years and how many people we had added sit-stand workstations to. They had been tracking some of that information, so they knew kind of what they were spending, like in a ballpark figure that they had purchased or had recommended 30 stand desks over the last X amount of years, and that they had they just went through and they had sort of a bank of information about what adjustability is there, or what adjustability we were trying to add to accommodate staff who were struggling to find fit. And what they realized, I think, was that in particular, the department that this office is in is almost exclusively female, very predominantly female. And so they were, what they found with this department specifically is that consistently that desk height, standard desk height, which is usually between like 29 and a half and 30 and a half inches, 29 and 30 and a half, is too high for many, many of the women that work there, right? And that's true of all organizations. Standard desk height is too high for a lot of women. And so what we saw them do is say, okay, if this is consistently a problem for this department, this is the department that's going to this new office. So to get ahead of our ergonomic issues, we want to have sit-stand desks available. So the fully height adjustable desk, it goes up and down. They also have a high amount of turnover in this department, just the nature of the work. People come in and then they move on to other roles in the organization. It's like a stepping stone position. And so they have a ton of turnover here too. So they were like, well, if we get more adjustability in here, we can accommodate our typically smaller female population. And anytime somebody leaves, our workstation should still be adjustable enough that whoever comes in next is very likely to be able to set it up correctly. And so that was where their focus and energy was, and procuring the right pieces to make all of those goals a reality. And I would say that overall, there's still a few things on occasion that we recommend, but generally speaking, we're tweaking setups and working heights and monitor heights, and not necessarily overhauling and adding all kinds of things to a workstation, right? It's usually more specialty things that we're dealing with when we're going into that office. It has definitely simplified the ergonomic process for them at that location. So purchasing standards can be used for a couple different things. Number one is looking at sort of a broader ordering this across the entire organization. But we also have the purchasing or the procurement piece of getting more specialty pieces in place, right? The reality is that office ergonomics, ergonomic injuries in the office can be driven by occupational related injury, right? So somebody has been working in the office and that's the root cause of their issue. But we also see tons of people who have non-OC injuries, right? So they've had a fall outside the workplace, they've had a motor vehicle accident. Physically, they're maybe struggling a little bit. Cognitively, they're very capable of doing the job. It doesn't require a lot of mobility. It's actually a good fit for them overall. But maybe a standard keyboard or a standard mouse isn't really working for them. And so that ability to have a few specialty products in place that you know are recommended often, things like maybe a keyboard without a number pad or 2 or 3 different styles of mice. If you have pre-selected those, it can also help make sure that you get standard equipment across the organization and that the equipment you're selecting is good, right? It's like people aren't just out buying whatever they think they're going to need. If they need a vertical mouse, we've pre-selected this vertical mouse as being a good fit for most individuals. You know the quality is good because you've tested it, you've tried it, you've seen it, and you've got a bit of a list, right, going. This is the normal one, but if you need something different, these are the 3 or 4 mice that we would consider, and maybe this is even why. You can even break it down further. And the same thing with keyboards, right? What are we potentially recommending here as well? We actually have a client who's doing this in a really interesting way. They have seen trends as well. So they've been watching us do assessments there for a long time, and they have seen trends about what we recommend. And so they have actually built their product list and run it by us and said, these are the things that we're thinking about stocking. So they have tackled it from we want to have this stuff on hand so that when you come in and do an ergonomic assessment, if you think someone needs a keyboard without a number pad, come and get one. I've got it. It's in my office, right? IT has a stash of them. They don't have hundreds, but they have 2 or 3 of each different piece on the standard equipment list. And so it's amazing as an ergonomist to come in, do an assessment, and have all this equipment available so that we can grab it, set it up, and the employee is off to the races, right? So there's none of this trying to get it set up correctly later, waiting for it to come in for another couple weeks while you continue to struggle with your setup of your workstation. They're tackling it in a very speed efficient way. And it just means that there's less steps in the process, right? If I think this equipment's needed, I'm still going to write a summary report and say that, but the equipment's already at the employee's desk, right? They were already trying it. So nobody needs to then order. Nobody needs to then check in and follow up. I mean, they should still follow up a couple weeks later, but essentially we have done all of those pieces for them because they have a few of each item on hand. So it's very rare that I can't grab something off the shelf and have someone set up in a better way that more aligns with the ergonomic goals and objectives because they pre-stocked some things, which is kind of interesting. That's the only client we have doing that, but it is kind of an interesting approach. Most of our clients are building a purchasing list, right? Saying, okay, this is our chair, and these are all the features, or these are the optional features you can also get if you need some additional pieces, right? And then these are the 3 keyboards we typically order. These are the 3 mice that we are ordering, and they're working their way down the list. Question was thoughts on using accessories to make the chair fit better, like a back support or a lumbar support. This is a good question, and the answer is not simple. In some cases, it works great, and in some cases, it doesn't work very well. And that's one of those ones that's a bit of a personal, a bit of an individualized approach, is that it depends. So, for example, a backrest. So adding an obus form to a chair, right? That would be a common solution for low back discomfort. We add an obus form. It's got a lumbar cushion present. We're putting that on the existing chair. The challenge that we sometimes see with that is what it does is actually push you forwards in the chair by a couple inches, right? Because the obus form takes up an inch or 2 of the seat. And so it pushes you forwards in the chair. For someone who, like me, is pretty short, that probably doesn't matter very much. And it's likely okay, and I can make that work. But for someone who's quite a bit taller than me, now someone is perching too far forwards in the chair and their legs aren't fully supported. And so it can be problematic for some folks. And it can work fine for others. And so we should sort of have to sort of tackle those on a case-by-case basis. But I would say as a general rule of thumb, if we're doing a better job on the procurement side, there should be less of those needs overall. Might be a short term, you need them right now, but if you could start building better chairs and better adjustability into that procurement piece, hopefully over time, the need for some of those accessories slowly disappears, right? Because you have more adjustable, better supportive equipment in place up front. Okay, so that was my getting ahead, right? If we can get involved in that design conversation, if we can tackle things earlier, if we can have a plan, a strategic plan in place of what equipment we're going to purchase, have all our stakeholders involved in that conversation, and build, maybe work on building our hybrid stations, then we are getting ahead of the injuries because we're creating space where it's all possible to achieve good setup. Now we need to stay ahead, right? Now we've done a really great job of getting everything set up, but now we need to stay ahead of our injuries. And so this is where some of our questions about education come into play. And so I do think this is an important piece of the puzzle. I think it's always an important piece of the puzzle. Training is my favorite thing to do with clients, partly because I think the impact can be huge, right? Is that we can reach so many individuals in such a short period of time. I would say if you're looking at traditional training, right, so like an actual session on how to properly set up your office ergonomic equipment, you're really looking at 2 options in terms of style. You're looking at a web-based version, like a webinar version like we're doing today, or an in-person classroom session. And I will tell you that I would never, ever in my wildest dreams have said this 5 years ago. But at this stage, my preference for this training is actually delivered web-based. And so I would encourage you to think about that because the reason I like it web-based is actually, I'll tell you the honest reason is really that when you do it in person, everybody is sitting in a boardroom, they're not at their workstation, and you're telling them how to adjust their chair, but they're not in their chair. And so they have to remember all these details, and then hopefully right after the session, they have some time to go back and make these adjustments at best. At worst, they have a booked solid afternoon and they don't actually get to make any changes until tomorrow morning. And all of this content that they just pulled in the last hour has now ruminated for almost 24 hours before they're able to put it into practice. And so I think sometimes that creates a bit of a challenge to recall all of the pieces and get them properly executed. So what I like about the web-based training is that it becomes a bit of a live opportunity to make those changes on the fly. So I tell people when I'm doing a webinar, this is what we're aiming for. Here are different ways of achieving it, depending on what you have at your workstation right now. Some of you have a keyboard tray. Some of you have height adjustable desk. Some of you don't have either, and you need to use your chair to do that. This is how we're going to do that. And we can walk through those different options. And just as importantly, people can do it while they're sitting there, because they should be at their workstation in their chair. And so that means that they can make those chair adjustments. They can raise or lower their seat to type at the right height. They can go, oh, shoot, my monitor is really low. You're right. And they can make those adjustments. Or they're looking at it, well, and you're right, my monitor, it's not adjustable. But you know what? Right after I get off this session, I know I can grab a paper ream. There's one down the hall. I can throw it underneath my monitor and raise it up. Right. So that there's a very live practical component to doing this web-based. I think people shy away from webinar-based trainings, and I get that because I think we were all webinared out over the course of COVID. But this is one of those trainings I actually prefer and think is better delivered in that format, just because of that one specific thing. People are sitting in their chairs, making adjustments as you go through, no memory required. We're going to make those adjustments together as a team. They can also ask questions about what they're seeing at their desk. If they're struggling with something and they don't know what this lever on their chair does, people ask me those questions. I've got this extra lever you haven't talked about yet. Here's where it is. And we can often go through some of those things. Question of the day is, when do we do it, right? I think if we're still trying to get ahead, stay ahead, ideally, this is done on a regular schedule of some kind. This is the sustainability component, right? Is that you'll have new staff coming on board. Maybe you'll have somebody who didn't have any discomforts last time you offered the training, but maybe they've got some new shoulder issue that's sort of cropped up and has been nagging at them. And this, doing it on a more regular basis will allow them to jump in when it makes sense, when they are motivated to make change. So I think a regular schedule is important. One of the questions that someone asked was about how often should we be revisiting this? Every client, again, will do this a bit different. It probably depends on your organization and what turnover looks like and things like that, the size of your organization. But we have some clients that are doing what I would call a regular session or a refresher session once every 6 months or once every year. And so they open it up to all their staff. They're doing it web-based, and they're saying, okay, we've got this session available on September the 24th. And then they offer their next one, in April or May, and then they come back to the fall, and they've got this nice cycle of every 6 months or so, they're doing a 1-hour training session, opening it up to everyone, and marketing it. And what we see is that sometimes we get repeat folks that come back on multiple sessions, and other times we see people hop in, maybe 2 or 3 sessions, they've been working there the whole time, but they weren't interested in the session. It didn't grab their attention until they had some discomfort, right? They've got some shoulder discomfort. Now they want to hear more about ergonomics. And so offering it on a 6-month rotation schedule means hopefully we're tackling these injuries and this discomforts early in the injury process, right? We're not letting it get too far down the road before we're making change. Other approaches that you can take is looking at this as part of your onboarding process, right? If you're trying to, again, systematically build it into your program, an office ergonomic education session, or whether that's an online module that someone takes or that you offer an education session as part of your onboarding, depending on how frequently you onboard, that can be also an important one, right? It's like really getting ahead, trying to get people set up well from day one, so that hopefully they never get to the point where there is an injury because they've been set up beautifully from the first step of the process. The only thing to be mindful about when you're doing an onboarding session like that is that people likely aren't having discomfort yet, right? So I would say general anecdote is that discomfort is the number one motivator for change, right? People are highly motivated to make change if they're uncomfortable. They're less motivated or unmotivated to make change if they don't have discomfort. So onboarding, in my opinion, needs to be paired a little bit with some assessment or like a physical check-in with people, because they might go through the motions and attend the onboarding session, but they're not having any discomfort, so they don't make any effort to change their workstation setup. Whereas if we get that follow-up or that check back in with maybe one of our in-house staff, just to go through a quick 10-minute check-in, have we got all these things set up correctly? Do you need anything else? Is there any questions I can answer? that might close the loop so that even if they aren't having discomfort, they're still actually making change because they're almost required to, because I have someone checking in with them, right? Maybe that's even a supervisor is doing a check-in, but I would say someone trained in-house to help support office ergonomics is probably your best person, because they'll have some background and some expertise and be able to provide some educated insight as to why we, reminder why we want to set up this way. In almost all cases, I would recommend training be a bit of standard and a bit of custom. And so what I mean by that is ergonomic training, office ergonomic training should follow the CSA standard on office ergonomics. That is the best practice as to how we set up our workstation. However, every workplace has different equipment in place. And so I like to sort of spin that with workplace specifics. So if you order global chairs, if that's your chair provider and every chair at your work site is from Global or should be, or nearly every chair, then I would feature global chairs in your your training session, right? I would show someone where the levers are on their actual chairs, right? The 3 levers on the right-hand side, the middle one is your seat height, the front one is your seat angle, the back one is your backrest angle. Here's what we want each of them to do. But very clearly talking about those 3 levers on these chairs, that's the global setup. That's what that looks like. If you have Herman Miller chairs, they don't have 3 levers. They work completely differently. And so talking about 3 levers on the right-hand side, or people not knowing where those levers are, obviously creates a bit of a gap. Now there's some figuring out on their own to be done. So that's where that workplace specific or equipment specific piece comes into play and can be super helpful. The other thing we have seen clients do over the last couple years actually have been to build some more custom modules, right? Like I had a client implement brand new shared workstations, a different client than the one I was talking about previously, brand new shared workstations and hoteling. They wanted to make sure everybody could set them up correctly. So what they did was build an online a module that was available through their internet that showed people how to adjust this new equipment. They had fully height adjustable desks. They had very adjustable monitors on a fancy monitor arm. They had a unique chair that it's super adjustable. I actually really like that chair, but it adjusts a bit differently than standard chairs do. So how to adjust the chair. And we took people through, built a module, an education piece that anyone could watch anytime they drop down at that workstation to review how to set up the equipment. So that can be that really very specific, very custom piece. We did have another client do this in a paper version, right? Instead of building an online module, they said, you know what? We don't know how many staff are going to access that. It adds extra steps. They have to go and find it on the internet. What we want is a paper instructions. So they actually created a bit of a tip sheet. It was a multi-page sort of thing that they hooked at the workstation. So when you sat down and you're like, this chair isn't feeling very comfy right now, you could grab this sheet, flip to the chair section, and read how to adjust the chair and read how, at the same time, how you want it set up. So this lever does this. Here's what we're aiming for. This lever does this. Here's what you should be aiming for, and take people through all the chair adjustments, but in a physical copy form. And so they laminated them. They put them at each desk. They thought that was going to be quicker and easier in order to walk through ergonomic setup. Again, all about sustainability, right? They want everybody to be able to successfully adjust the equipment that is present. So they had new standard equipment that was going to be there. They provided that sustainable education, easy, accessible, always present, and it just allowed everyone to get good setup each time, hopefully warding off injuries if people were following the practice of the protocol, right? Making sure that they were going through the steps. And they don't need to do it every time. If they've done it once or twice, if they're consistently getting the chair feeling more comfortable, then probably they're fine. Second part of this is assessment. And I think there's 2 pieces to assessment. Specifically, I think there's assessment that is proactive, and I think there's assessment that is reactive. Your proactive assessment is pre-injury, right? Pre-discomfort, pre-injury. Employees are not having any discomfort at this stage. We're trying to tackle ergonomic setup issues to ward off that discomfort in the long term. Again, this can connect back to that onboarding example that I gave you earlier, right? Those 2 go hand in hand. We train and educate, then we do a bit of a follow-up or check-in. These tend to be short, right? People aren't having complicated discomfort. It's usually a check-in, make sure you've been able to implement all the stuff you just heard about in the onboarding session. This often is a good, again, policy sustainability theme today. If you have somebody who has a job change or a workstation change, this should also trigger a follow-up or a check-in, right? Whether it is, I've actually got the next slide, but whether it is a self-evaluation, which could be part of your process, somebody changes jobs and workstations, you send them a self-assessment or a self-evaluation, right? Are you set up correctly? They return that to their supervisor and their supervisor or health and safety, and you can follow up with them on that. But essentially, it can also be done by an individual physically going and visiting their workstation, right? Checking in with them. But anytime someone starts a new job or changes workstations, it's a good time to do an ergonomic check-in. Make sure that everything is set up to prevent injuries happening in the future. So these are all proactive. These can be done in-house or contracted out. Okay, so I'm going to skip a slide here because I think I'm out of order, but I'll come back to those other pieces. I think there is a difference between in-house and contracted out. Obviously, people contract us to do these ergonomic assessments, but I would say that there's a bunch of clients that we work with, and we help train their in-house team. Right, so the idea is that when the discomforts or the issues are relatively straightforward, when it's part of an onboarding process, when it's a more proactive assessment, there isn't complicated injury, discomfort, return to work going on. In-house assessments can be a great proactive tool. They can be quicker, they can be easier, you can get to people faster, they're less expensive often if you can figure out how to fit it into someone's schedule and routine. But if you can check in with someone early in the process, that often is a preventative tool. We also see our clients tackling using in-house assessments when someone initially reports an injury. So this is more reactive. We've got an injury now. Our in-house team, which has been trained on how to do basic ergonomic assessments, will go in, we'll do an evaluation, we'll maybe recommend a couple pieces of equipment, and we'll see how that goes, and we'll check back in 2 to 3 weeks. If the employee is feeling better, great. We're moving on. Everything is going well. If the employee is not feeling better, if something has changed about their status, if they have from the very get-go, it's a very complicated return to work or injury, then we most often, even with our clients that are doing in-house training, our in-house assessments, they're contracting those ones out because they're complicated. They're more than most of our in-house staff are capable of and or have time for, right? The reality is there's only so many hours in the day. And so putting that out of house instead of in-house sometimes makes a big difference. Our in-house training, when we do this, we try and get to anywhere between 2 and 5 people, maybe a few more for a large organization trained up. These can be all kinds of different staff, right? Your champions in the workplace, people who are interested in ergonomics, maybe some of your committee members, maybe a supervisor, maybe some of your health and safety associates if there's more than one of you. All those folks could potentially be good candidates to be trained to be in-house assessors. This session for us looks like a full day. We train you on what are the basics of ergonomics, what are we looking for, what does setup look like, and then in the afternoon we actually get people practicing because that's often the scary part, right? We do all the learning and we're really good at that piece, but actually doing the assessment can be scary. And so we try and get people out actually practicing, doing those in pairs or shadowing the ergonomist and then doing one on their own, getting some feedback. That sort of helps make it a little, break the ice a little bit, makes it easier to conduct your own individual assessments in the future. But they are a great way an in-house individual who is 2 or 3 in-house individuals who are trained to do these assessments as a proactive nature instead of reactive can be a really great tool in order to tackle ergonomics ahead of the game, right? So we're not waiting for injuries to occur. We've got it built into our practice with onboarding, workstation changes, et cetera, that we're tackling ergonomics there. I did mention self-assessment. We are seeing this more and more with those home office pieces is that some of our clients are working on self-assessment. So it's harder to see people's home office workstations, right? So we have some clients that are sending out a self-assessment tool. The employee is sending it back in. The supervisor is checking in with them on those pieces, making sure that anytime they couldn't achieve ideal setup, that someone's reviewing that with them, making sure they know how to. If they have any questions, they can get access to, a health and safety rep or someone who can help support that, or additional reference material, but essentially trying to build self-assessment into the process to take a little bit more work off you, right? To make it, but again, sustainable. Anytime, it's just part of the process. Anytime somebody is going to be working from home, they go through this self-assessment tool to try and make sure that they're set up correctly. Hopefully we don't get to the reactive category, but it is necessary sometimes. Like I said, some are occupational, some are non-occupational, but sometimes we are accommodating individuals, right? Because they have reports of discomfort, because they've come in with a doctor's note that says they need an ergonomic assessment, because it's a reportable injury. There's all kinds of reasons why we have to get to the reactive side. But there's a process in place for that too, right? When somebody, what are the steps that are necessary to simplify this process? How does somebody submit a request for an ergonomic assessment? How does someone do they need a doctor's note? Do they not need a doctor's note? What is all this going to look like? And mapping that out. And ultimately, every time we get to this stage where someone's reporting discomfort, has a medical note, has a reportable injury, etc., there is automatically triggers an ergonomic assessment. Whether that's an in-house assessment and you're going to try yourself first, or whether you're automatically sending that out of house and contracting that out, we see both happen and both work fine depending on what the situation is, but it should immediately trigger an ergonomic assessment. If there's a problem and we know there's discomfort, we need to be taking action on that. Okay, so that will be our next step there. The one thing I didn't mention, but I should actually, is that ergonomic assessments can also be done virtually, right? We're doing, again, COVID sort of created a necessity for a virtual assessment, but it has been here to stay for various reasons. It's very accessible. It's easy to do. There's no travel time required. We can book them back to back. I can actually do a bunch of them in a day. But just as importantly, not everyone wants folks to come into their home office. So home offices can be all over the place depending on where people live. So it gives us an easier opportunity to get into someone's home office space without physically coming into their home. And so we could do them for workplaces too, but we do find that there's been a significant uptick in the number of virtual assessment requests. And those could be done in-house as well. We actually trained a client that was part of their practice. They're based in Toronto, but she has staff all over the place, all across Canada, and she's the one woman show. And so she needs to do it all. And so she was like, well, I can't fly to BC to meet with all these folks. So she needed training. That in-house assessment training for her included a virtual piece, right? Okay, how do you do this if you're in person? What does this look like if you're virtual? So you can deliver that assessment piece to every staff, regardless of wherever they are located, right? And that may or may not be relevant to you depending on the type of workplace you have, but it is possible to incorporate virtual into that in-house component, right? It can also be hard with people working home and office. You may not be in the office the same day as the other person's in the office, and so sometimes virtual makes more sense even when everybody actually works from the same location on some days. That was all I wanted to cover today, and hopefully I gave you some examples of what some of our clients are doing. But the sort of final message I wanted to highlight here is that sustainability is really about prevention, right? Our programs are sustainable, they're easier, they're less work required for you if there is a process in place that allows us to prevent injuries, right? As soon as an injury occurs, it's always more work. There's more steps involved, there's more work, there's more urgency to everything. Whereas if we can get our system, our program to be working more sustainably earlier on in the process, if we were checking in with people during onboarding, when they get new workstations, when we're building equipment, when we're selecting equipment, when we're building new workstations, we are preventing injuries, which means hopefully on the back end, we're doing way less work on ergonomics, office ergonomics in general. So we really want to focus on getting to that sustainability and that prevention side of things. That's really where I think your bread and butter is, and where you're going to save the most time and resources. Amazing. I am happy to field some questions. I do have 1 o'clock, so if you need to scuttle off to another meeting, I get that. That's life at the moment, I think, looks like that. But I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has anything they wanted me to tackle that maybe I haven't covered yet. I tried to highlight most of the pieces. You are more than welcome.